So this story will make you angry. Not bad enough now that the price of groceries continues to go up. People have trouble, of course, shopping, and trying to keep within budgets. And then to find out, it turns out a CBC investigative report, checking into a couple of different supermarkets across the country, by the way, not in one particular area, has revealed that despite promises to the contrary, some of these stores are still now charging you for beef or chicken, which, well, when they tell you the price, it's supposed to be based on weight. Turns out that weight is not accurate. You're basically paying for the packaging, not just the meat that you're buying. And that comes to thousands, in some cases, hundreds of thousands of dollars more that you're being charged. Now, what's even worse in this story is the fact that this was first noted a year or two ago. The stores promised they would change things, and they did not. So it's just been found to have happened yet again. Sylvain Charlebois, we know him as the food professor, senior director at Agri-Food Analytics, and he's over at the university at Dalhousie, of course. I had a chance to speak to him earlier this afternoon about just this. And again, the thing that stands out to me is the fact that not only are you being charged for food that is actually not there, they weigh one way, but you're paying for food, including packaging. But the fact is, I just said that this has happened before, and it continues to happen again. I asked him his reaction.
That's right. The most troubling part of the story is that we needed media to tell us that there was fraud being committed on a regular basis. I think, to me, that's the most troubling thing, which is the same thing as with the maple syrup scandal, which occurred earlier a couple of weeks ago. Again, the media investigated. Where are the regulators? Where are the inspectors? There's no excuse for having scales in stores that are not accurate, whether it's lack of training, whether scales weren't properly programmed. There's just no excuse at all. And so now the CBC in this case actually looked into a few stores, but my guess is that it's a widespread problem across the board.
You mentioned where's the agency, right? So the CFI, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, is supposed to be monitoring these kinds of things instead of just sending out notices on, food recalls. But it's interesting because the story as I read it, it's a former inspector with the Canadian Food Inspection Agency who kind of called this out.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, there's one piece missing in the story is that there is a bit of a split responsibility between the CFI and Measurement Canada under Industry Canada. And this is important for your listeners because if you actually think that a scale in a store is inaccurate, you should also call Measurement Canada. There's a website. There's a link there. You can actually submit a complaint. And their role is to do exactly that, to assess the accuracy of scales at retail. No matter what you're selling, that's their job. And so, and to be honest with you, they're much quicker than the CFI. My guess, the reason why this is happening, I think, Aaron, is that a lot of folks know that if you call the CFI and complain, they'll investigate, but it will take a year,
right?
Even more. The CBC or the media can actually react much more quickly to rectify the problem.
But to that point, it's worth mentioning yet again, this has happened before. They got called out in these cases. I mentioned Loblaws and Sobeys, for example. I think there are other stores involved as well. And it's one thing to acknowledge, the first time around, we weren't aware, if that's the excuse. But the second time around, knowing that there was a problem and to have done nothing about it, that's a bit galling.
And it's going to happen again. I can assure you it's going to happen again. And so that's why there's no excuse and there's no other word than fraud to qualify what's going on. So it's important. The one advice I can give your listeners, get a kitchen scale. It's $15-20 on Amazon. Get one and measure everything. So buy, trust, but verify as much as possible. Most of the time, I suspect that you won't see a mistake, but if you do, I would call both the CFI and Measurement Canada.
By the way, let me just point out, this was not one or two things. I mean, from the report that I read, they purchased and documented 32 underweight meat products from 7 stores. When I saw this, the first thing I thought, Sylvain, was, well, wait a sec, maybe this is just a matter of you weigh a beef item, for example, and it's in a container. The container weighs a couple ounces as well, but that's far too easy an excuse, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's not just the container. It is, at 17%, It's not just a container. There's seriously something wrong with the scale. So that's why the lack of rigor, and this is what we're talking about. So the lack of rigor shown by grocers is real appalling. It's quite disappointing.
Beyond disappointing. So as you said, for consumers listening, what's the deal here? You're obviously not going to weigh this at the store when you're there because you trust the people you're buying this from. But given that this is now sort of, in the public eye, is the advice, buy whatever you're buying, but then, if you can, invest in that scale. And if there's a problem, what do you do? Can you take it back to the store? Do you just let Measurements Canada know or the CFIA know? What's the process?
Oh, if you do take it back to the store, they will rectify the problem. And, of course, that becomes a precision problem with the price. And if the product, so you're in Quebec, so under $20, they owe that product to you for free. Just so you know.
Right.
So if there's a mistake in the price, so up to $20 now since last year, they owe that product to you for free. They should be doing that. And I would also complain to the CFIA and Measurement Canada because you probably dealt with one scale. There may be other scales that are at fault.
By the way, to that point, I was not aware. I know it used to be $10, right? Now that minimum is $20?
The law changed last year.
Oh.
Yeah.
So any mistake in pricing up to $20, you have to get your money back.
Only in Quebec.
Well, there's finally something good. Let me ask one other
thing. That
is
potholes.
Yeah, well, besides that, but let me ask one other thing here because, I mentioned off the top about the 10% or the 10 cent cut in the gas tax. But at the same time where you might be saving there, food suppliers are now adding surcharges to actually deal with the rising cost of fuel. And I wonder, will that change because of what's just been announced, you think?
Actually, I'm surprised it's been announced now because it's been going on for a couple of weeks now, at least, since even before Easter, I would say. So I was made aware that there were surcharges all over the place, even before Easter. So we are starting to see prices being impacted by surcharges at the grocery store in different places around the country, including Quebec. So I wasn't surprised. It will continue. The thing, Aaron, about what's going on right now with oil prices and fuel prices is that we have a lot of playing around with prices on world markets, and that playing around is often conducted by the White House itself. And so that yo-yo you're seeing on markets up and down and up and down, transport companies will highball the price of energy and will charge as much as possible. Yeah. And that's why these surcharges are there.
By the way, I will mention one other thing, going back to the idea of, you're buying food that's been, basically badly weighted. The fine, from what I read in the story, Sylvain, it was a $15,000 fine to the chain, which, of course, the people bringing this up suggest, you know what, that's nothing. That's just the cost of doing business for them, and it should be much, much higher than that.
The most important thing for all of us is to make this public. That's even more hurtful than a fine. Any fine, really. If you get to the reputation of these companies, that's much, much worse than $100,000 or $1 million fine, for sure. Which
is what hopefully is going to start to happen now, and now that the story, as you said off the top, has gone public. All right, we will leave it at that. Sylvain, thank you so much. Always appreciate your time.
All right, take care.
Take good care.
iHeartRadio is throwing it back.
2010s, the decade.
To the days of huge hits and unforgettable anthems. A non-stop stream of the biggest and best.
Drake, Rihanna, Beyonce, Katy, Gaga, The Weeknd.
And more. All your decade-defining favorites all in one place.
Hi, it's Katy Perry.
Hey, it's Bruno Mars.
This is Kesha.
Find 2010's The Decade on the free iHeartRadio app. Preset the station so it's always one tap away.